Hello, Koen Powell's here. I'm joined today by John Hay, which I selected as a prime example of the analyst role that you find in your syllabus. Hey, John, how are you doing?
Well. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you thinking of me for this.
Thank you so much. It's been just I think a few months since we interviewed for the book, right? Break the Wall: How to Democratize Business, Digital in Your Business. Sorry. So this may be a bit repetitive for you, but I just kind of loved our talk at the time. And I wanted to kind of specifically ask you, kind of, can you introduce a bit about kind of what you do, for the wonderful company that you're working with, whether they perform great on the field or not. But your task is just very very fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, so I'm the VP of Data Intelligence and Analytics at the Boston Red Sox. So what that means is I oversee the team that kind of we really oversee everything on the sort of off-field side. So we have a separate team that thinks about player acquisition, contract analysis, things like that. What really focus on is customer engagement, ticket pricing, concessions, new ventures, things like that. And so yeah, so it's a lot of fun. I mean, our job really is to create a culture of data-driven decision making at the Red Sox. So when I joined the team in 2013, it's actually spent a couple of years on the baseball side. I spent a couple of years, doing more of the sabermetric kind of work, and then in 2015, kind of moved over, and we really didn't have, we had a lot of very anecdotal sort of decision making. It
Yeah.
was very sort of like, oh, I remember this happened a couple of years ago, or I kind of heard this or that. And so a lot of my job the last 6 or 7 years has been how do we kind of get towards this culture of using data to sort of underpin every decision that we make here, whether it be, again, how much should a beer cost, or should we buy the Pittsburgh Penguins, which we did in December. So that's always, so large and small, I guess, is the goal. And to that end, so we are owned by Fenway Sports Group. So we own the Boston Red Sox, we own NESN, the channel here, we own Liverpool Football Club and the EPL, we own the Penguins, we own a NASCAR racing team, RFK Racing. So fun for me to kind of get involved with a lot of those different challenges as well.
Oh, fantastic! Thanks so much. I would love to know the answer to the penguin one, but I guess you're not at liberty to talk about
I
that
mean,
one.
we went through the transaction, so
Yeah.
we'll see. But no, it's a fun. That's been a really fun one because there's a lot of things that I think in sports you can learn from different. There's things that baseball does very well. I
Yeah.
think we sell suits very well because we sell 3 million tickets a year. There's things that other sports do extremely well around like customer engagement and things like
Cool.
media rights and sponsorship. And so it's a great opportunity for us, I think, to learn from them. And hopefully there's a lot of corporate synergies between like our sponsorship team, between some of our data analytics efforts and things like that.
But I think you touch about something very important for an analyst, right? So you have to fight the not invented here syndrome. I mean, you know your stuff, but you can also learn from others. So I was fascinating, like something as simply as about how much should you charge for a beer, right? So how do you feel that as an analyst, kind of, or that you or your team have helped the Red Sox to address that question better?
Yeah, it's funny. We've helped the Red Sox. I'm not sure we've helped our attendees, but people always ask me why are beers so expensive, and what I say is, well, every time you raise the price of beer, you guys drink the same amount of it. We raise the price of hot
That's
dogs, you
Boston
guys
for
eat
you.
cheeseburgers instead. So the answer is there's pretty inelastic demand for beer at Fenway Park.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that says about our fans or anything like that, but yeah. So what we do a lot of is, what used to happen is every year we'd sit in a room and people would say, how about 50 cents more for a pretzel? And how about 25
Yeah.
cents here? And it'd be kind of this horse trading back and forth. What we do now is we're pulling all the data in, we're building out predictive models and saying, hey, we expect that if the goal is to increase prices by 3% next year, here's what we anticipate is the sort of price increase that actually will result in the sort of the least attrition of sales and kind of the most revenue sort of increase. So
Oh,
we're sort of coming
fantastic.
in with sort of a predictive modeling sort of version of that, which then you want to combine with qualitative. We're not going to. Someone might say, yeah, but Coca-Cola is charging us an extra dollar per soda.
Mm.
Well, we're not going to know that in the model, right? So you have to kind of combine the qualitative and quantitative, I think, to really come to a conclusion there.
Oh, excellent. And thanks for using kind of price elasticity. That's one of the concepts that are key here that I want to get across.
It's
So
my
in kind
undergraduate education still
oh
coming
yeah,
up. So
that's
that's
true. Yeah. So I was fascinated by our previous interview. You went into depth. I think the question was how do you prioritize different kind of analysis project, and you talked about like a two by two, like every good kind of communicator, about kind of there's the the potential business impact, and there's also the effort needed to analyze it, right? And so can you talk about kind of how you think through that, and in which quadrant you want to be when you're prioritizing different projects?
Yeah, I love my two by
Mm.
twos. It's a nice,
Yeah.
I thought it's a nice way to structure problem. So I think to that end, like I think one of the great things about my role is we really touch everything, right? So we work with marketing, ticketing, operations, sales, ballpark ops, finance, HR, our foundation. We are involved in sponsorship. Now we're getting more involved with other properties. And so for me, sitting in my chair every day, there's 1,000 things I could work on. There's 1,000 things my team could work on. And so, what you're referring to is I sort of put a lot of our efforts into this sort of 2x2, where one axis is sort of level of effort, right? So this is pretty quick to sort of put out the door. This is sort of very complicated. And then sort of level of impact, right? So something up here might be, dynamic pricing is something where if you kind of get ticket pricing right, that can be a multi-million-dollar impact in the course of a year. Whereas, there might be something like, we looked at the carbon emissions, what's the carbon footprint of Fenway Park and how does that track over time? Very important. Absolutely important for the future. It's sort of it's certainly in this quadrant of complicated, right? Because you're starting to measure what are all the ways that Fenway Park generates, sort of carbon emissions. There's a lot of them. You're estimating how do people get to the park, all this sort of stuff, and then you come up with a number which is helpful. It's not unhelpful, but it's probably not going to change the way you do business tomorrow, right? Yeah. It's going to be sort of a slow burn. So we try as much as possible to kind of live in this top right quadrant of things that we feel like we can sort of tackle and bite off and get out the door, but that are really going to sort of drive change kind of on the back end. And then, as you work through those, there's opportunities to move to, the top left and bottom right, and you try and stay out of that bottom left if you can. But, sometimes the person asking for it is very important. So you have to find a way to 80-20 those things, as it were. So.
Yeah. So that leads to the next question, right? So a lot of your stakeholders may not kind of fully understand the depth of your analysis or, data limitations and so forth. So how do you communicate with stakeholders that may not kind of fully understand statistical language, for instance?
Yeah, that's been so much of my role. It's funny because I think I mentioned last time, I started off as the fingers on keys, data analyst. I was the one building all the models. And as time has gone on and I've hired people, I still do that, but I've also become the person that is really liaising between sort of my data analytics intelligence team and our C-level executives. So much of my job is to, exactly like you said, convey, here's what's knowable, here's what's unknowable, and here's sort of like, not calling them confidence intervals, but helping them understand the concept of confidence. We think that this game will sell 18,000 tickets, but we actually think the 95% bar is 15,000 or 21,000. And so if the game's 17.5, we're pretty happy with that, sort of versus someone saying like, I thought you said 18,000. And so the example I always give is one of our senior executives, I won't name him in this, but many years ago, we put together a game by game forecast. So here's all 81 games of the season, how many tickets we think will sell. And we round them all to the nearest 100 tickets, right? So 35,100, 34,300. And this executive goes, well, that's weird. They all round to the nearest 100. Like that's strange. And we said, well, I mean, it's October. These games are next year. We can't possibly get to the single digit of this. I don't know what the weather is going to be. And he basically said, well, look, if we can't get to the single digit, why are we even doing all this work? And we said, really good point. So I went back to my desk and I did a plus, ran between minus 50, 50, and said, good news, you really pushed us. And I think we got there. We feel much better about these numbers now. So sometimes you just got to give them what they want if it helps you kind of get the stuff out the door. So
that's a fascinating story. It reminds me of my colleague Oded Natseri has this book called Decisions Over Decimals. And he says, if it's something that you can't predict very precisely, don't give somebody, we're going to sell 15,137. Do rounds, because that's the importance, right? You have to have a ballpark, but sometimes giving the confidence intervals actually helps. That's great. So
totally, yeah.
So I'm just kind of and I think people were very interested kind of when you're looking for an analyst, right? So what kind of skills does that person have? Where do you go to hire analysts for your team, and what kind of looking forward? Maybe what are some of the skills that become more and more important to be a good analyst in a company?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of technical skills, I think for us, SQL is always right up there. We have a SQL Server-based enterprise data warehouse. We're in the process of migrating to the cloud, so that's getting a little bit less relevant. But DBT is a replacement for that, and those are very similar languages. I think having something like a Python or an R or something that's sort of something where you can go and build, write code, build models, like the ability to sort of go and do those sorts of things yourself without having to utilize an outside tool, I think is really valuable. And then, I think really business intelligence, as you think about the Tableaus and Lookers and ClickViews of the world, so much of the job becomes, it's important to build a great model. That's really important. Yeah. But if your goal really is to convince other people of the efficacy of your model. And so if you can sort of have this nice storytelling tool at your fingertips, I think it's almost like data storytelling sometimes more than sort of data analytics is kind of what I found. And so I think certainly finding people with kind of that skill set, I think is really important for us. And I think the second thing I'd say is, what I've realized over the years of hiring, for me at least, is sometimes I think of it as like a draft, right? So you think about the NBA draft, and you've got these players who are 4-year college seniors, super refined. They've got, on day one, they're going to be in the lineup, and you got these guys that maybe are only in high school. They're projectable. They got a lot of physical skills, but they haven't spent a lot of time playing basketball yet. And so I tend to what I've found is drafting the good athletes and being able to train them, I think has sort of been successful for us. I think what I find is if you find someone who is intelligent, hardworking, passionate, intellectually curious, they can learn SQL and Python and R and Tableau. I mean, that stuff's not rocket science, but they're gonna have a higher ceiling potentially, and maybe be a little bit more hungry about that whole thing. So we've definitely, I think, trended to. We've had decisions between a couple of candidates that are going to be more and less raw. I think we have tended to have success kind of finding those people that, look, are they passionate about what you're doing? Do they really want to be there? Are they going to put in the extra time? In the long run, that's going to have a much larger impact than someone who on day one maybe can say you can give them a job and they can go kind of do that job. So having a longer learning curve is maybe worth it for me in the long run of having that higher ceiling.
Okay. And do you feel on the other side, right, that a lot of people who may be great analysts in general, really should know the baseball context, or does it help if you're excited about baseball?
It certainly helps. It's funny. I interview a lot of people, and I often ask the question, why do you want to work here? And I sometimes joke, the worst answer is because I love baseball and love the Red Sox. Not to say that that's a bad thing, but you have to love the job you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not playing right field. Like you're working on my data team, and so it's you're doing that for 50 hours a week. I really want you to be paying. I want you to say, look, I like baseball, I like the Red Sox, whatever, but I'm really passionate about solving complicated problems with data, and I want you to tell me kind of that story. And so that is to say that you don't need to be a fan of sports or the Red Sox to be here. Because sports doesn't pay very well compared to others.
It helps.
What we tend to find is that we over-index for big baseball fans, because otherwise you could probably make more money working in biotech. So you're just going to go do that instead, I guess is my point.
Yeah. And I guess kind of, books are the movie with Brad Pitt about Moneyball may be a great recruitment tool, right? I don't know if that's a plus or a minus to people say Moneyball.
People bring it up a lot. It is funny because when I started on the baseball side, I was working for Bill James, he was in the movie. Bill James invented the word sabermetrics. He's sort of so I sort of often tell people like, I sort of like I'm living Moneyball, and then I'd say, but I'm not the Brad Pitt character. I'm the Jonah Hill character. Unfortunately for me, I'm never Brad Pitt in this scenario. So.
Okay, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for talking with us again. Any kind of last maybe advice for people interested in an analytics career?
Yeah, I think what I would say is, first of all, maybe two things. One is, be really open about just reaching out to people. I get cold emails and cold LinkedIns all the time. If I have the time, I always take those calls. I think there's a lot of people in this industry that have been helped out by others, not just sports obviously, but analytics in general. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity out there to, whether it's through conferences or cold outreach, definitely like try and build your network and interview people and pick their brains and figure out kind of where you want to be. Because I think there's a lot of ways you can take this skill set. So the more that you can learn up front about different paths, I think is really important. So that's one thing. And the second thing I'd say is, at the end of the day, find something that you're passionate about. What I always say is, I make less. I worked in finance for 5 years after college, and I was on Wall Street, right before everything got really, really crazy, and so that was very lucrative for me. And I make less money now than I made when I was 22 years old, but boy, am I happier, because I love what I do. And this backdrop is I'm inside Fenway Park right now. That's Jersey Street behind me. So it's definitely something where if you can be passionate about what you do, I think it's just a game changer in terms of the way that you approach your career. So easier said than done sometimes, but something I always espouse is really trying to find something that you love to do.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic advice. Thanks so much, John.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.